It's easy to look back fondly on Gore Verbinski's Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. 20 years later, many of us who grew up watching them in cinemas or on DVD have developed the inevitable nostalgia that helps overlook some of their shortcomings. But to suggest their positive reassessment is entirely nostalgia would be inaccurate. The once poor critical reception of the two sequels in particular feels unfair in hindsight of how low the standards for blockbuster movies have fallen in the 2 decades since, and pirate or naval media never becoming oversaturated like other genres means they have preserved a sense of novelty. They are ambitious and stylized and very well made, and they give us a strange combination of dark epic fantasy and humorous adventure fun that you rarely see outside of the anime industry, if at all. The truth of their quality lies in between their original critical reception and the modern reassessment, because despite maintaining filmmaking prowess throughout that has put so many blockbusters since then to shame, including the 2 non-Verbinski directed sequels, they still suffer from compounding issues of convoluted plotting, bloated vague world building, and an over-reliance on established personalities interacting in silly ways instead of deep character development, all of which obscures what, in the narratively focused first film, started out as well-defined themes. The corporatization of the 4th and 5th Pirates movies clearly marks the industry's shift away from something we didn't know we would have so little time to appreciate. Such high budgets scarcely given to such idiosyncratic productions. The endangered creativity of the Verbinski trilogy so far aging much better than the forgettably bland repetition of almost everything Disney and Netflix have dominated the industry with since.
Pirates of the Caribbean, an audio animatronic experience you'll never forget. See it now at Disneyland. Pirates of the Caribbean.
The first entry in this unlikely adaptation of a Disney theme park ride, Curse of the Black Pearl, was released in 2003. It was supposedly the last ride that Walt Disney himself participated in designing before his death, immediately instilling the film with a kind of protective aura that reassures it will be of classical Disney quality, and at a point where Pixar was still pumping out some of the best animated movies in the business. 2003 was the year of one of the few other high-budget nautical movies we have ever gotten, Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World, which, if you were to place nautical media on a scale from historical realism to fantasy, would anchor the most realistic end. The Pirates films, by contrast, begin closer to the midpoint of that scale and drift steadily towards fantasy with each sequel, each new monster and magical MacGuffin inching closer to One Piece than to anything resembling real history. Curse of the Black Pearl is the most grounded the franchise has been so far, and that relative restraint contributes to it working better than all the others. The most supernatural of the film's fantasy elements do not stop it from resembling an alternate 18th century Earth, with the ocean behaving mostly like the ocean, ships behaving like real ships, fights taking place with swords, muskets and cannons, and Aztec gold inflicting the antagonist crew with cursed immortality that robs them of the tactile pleasures of existence. The title itself is a carefully calibrated representation of the film's balance. Why Curse of the Black Pearl and not Curse of the Aztec Gold? The magical MacGuffin actually responsible for the villain's grotesque skeletal curse, because the ship named the Black Pearl is the true center of the story, through the motivations of its most important character, and maintains that grounded nautical connection whilst sounding uniquely mysterious and ominous, compared to Aztec gold sounding like a generic treasure groups of pirates would be searching for. Knowing the context of the film, and really the whole franchise, the Black Pearl remains the prized possession of its self-proclaimed captain, Jack Sparrow. In a way, it is his unique curse, defining his past achievements as a pirate, the status he seeks to reclaim along with the ship, and what the ship personally means to the life he wants to live, his pursuit constantly complicated by something or another. whether a supernaturally empowered crew physically taking it from him, or his own heroic instincts to help the acquaintances he makes along the way. The Aztec gold is important to Jack Sparrow because it is keeping the Black Pearl out of his hands and preventing him from using his magic compass to point towards something else he desires most. The curse and the Aztec gold itself he isn't interested in because the immortality they provide would make his pirating life joyless. One of the most iconic character introductions in cinema history succinctly and entirely visually explains who Jack is, why he wants that ship, and why Johnny Depp more than earned his authorship over the role.
And I thought there was something very beautiful and poignant about the idea of his objective. I mean, all he wants is to get his ship back.
As has been discussed on many prior occasions, it really does so perfectly encapsulate everything about how he operates and his place in the world that it's hard to think of another character introduction from the blockbuster landscape to top it. Pridefully gliding atop a sinking vessel, making the most of an unfavourable situation as though it were his plan all along, confidently maintaining momentum on his way into the story with a distinct stroll across the dock. For a character so crucially embodying what the trilogy would make a success out of, Jack might have ended up being a far more conventional, roguish archetype had Depp not come along and reframed him as a kind of trickster rock star, inspired by Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, to the predictable discomfort of Disney.
It was extraordinary to watch Johnny Depp create that character because he played him like a complete drunken fool. Not that he was drunk, but every time I looked at him on set, I always thought he had about 8 vodkas or something, as he could barely get his words out. And would just casually throw things off, and it was such a cool performance and very masterfully done.
It might be prudent to treat a big-name actor coming along and reshaping a film around themselves with caution, but the transformation here of what might have been a forgettably standard adventure role elevated the film so much that it's futile trying to imagine it any other way. And really, casting Johnny Depp, what did the studio expect? Preceding Pirates, his career largely involved eccentric characters in artsy cult hits like Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and he wasn't that influential of a blockbuster star until this franchise, so it's hard to argue that he was protecting a brand of what audiences expected from him. No, this reads much more like a creative gamble that paid off enormously for him and the film, his eccentricity perfectly colliding with mainstream cinema in a way that stuck. Played slightly wrong, and the character could have been deemed obnoxious by the majority of viewers, as would unfortunately slowly become the case, with each sequel exaggerating the most obvious elements of his quirkiness. The Jack Sparrow in Curse of the Black Pearl is a once-in-a-career, career-defining performance and character, the kind that makes the actor seem possessed for all their time on screen in a way that briefly overwrites their real personality, that now seems uncanny in comparison when seeing and hearing them in interviews. And for Depp specifically, he was never able to fully recapture that possession again, increasingly devolving into a Jack Sparrow caricature as though he were doing an impression of himself.
X always marks the spot. Savvy? You know what I mean. It's an old saying.
More important than mannerisms and dialect, however, the character was just never quite written the same way as in the first film, where Depp had this very clear story to convey about the morally complex heart that really made Jack Sparrow legendary and lovable, despite basically being an adventurous, seafaring thief.
He looked at me like, "Are you cool with this?" And I was just, ecstatic.
And he said, "That's it, yeah." He got it immediately. And he knew where I was trying to go with the character.
But why is the rum gone?
The originality of Curse of the Black Pearl lies far more in tone, narrative rhythm, and performance than in raw plot invention. The story follows a familiar adventure formula, but what makes it endure is how confidently and efficiently the elements of that formula are executed to have a wide appeal across all ages, without feeling like it's trying to placate everyone possible, which would risk satisfying no one in particular. It kind of created its own niche that a lot of new viewers were enthusiastic to jump on board for, and still are, only there hasn't really been anything else quite like it since.
Rash, Turner. too rash.
These films are often criticised as convoluted, and though I don't think this first film deserves that label as much as the two sequels, fully understanding the convolution never becomes necessary to thoroughly enjoy the experience. It is simultaneously providing a meticulously engineered example of a switch your brain off experience, and something slightly more narratively and thematically meaty to bite into for those of us who fancy that at the moment we happen to be watching it. So the density of the plot, with all of its twists and overlapping motivations, a lot of which comes from trying to guess whose side Jack is really on, or if he's just being self-interested, isn't much of a flaw so far as this tightly written first film is concerned, and actually that density may be a crucial byproduct of keeping the story moving at an exciting pace to have that mainstream appeal. Even as an experienced film watcher, and with all these Pirates films having accessibly predictable, crowd-pleasing stories, rarely did I feel as though I was waiting for the next obvious plot development to happen, and that's with the visual storytelling and dialogue both repeating each other's expositions about where each character is at throughout the story, using a variety of engaging scenarios and imagery to make sure no viewers are left so far behind that they start to lose track of the emotional journey. That a mainstream film can so effectively wield its illusionary movie magic like this really shows just how well directed it is. Something is always moving to keep mainstream audiences engaged, whether it's reinforcing character traits, lively action and set pieces, or both. And quite often it's both.
He roped himself a couple of sea turtles, lashed them together and made a raft.
An important example of the film's narrative efficiency, or rather the most important, because it involves the two other main characters that make up the dysfunctional Jack Sparrow trio, are Will Turner and Elizabeth Swan, who we are introduced to in the prologue. Will grows up to be played by Orlando Bloom at the height of his early 2000s breakout. Coming from nothing as an orphan found at sea, he is a blacksmith's apprentice who receives no credit for the fine swords he forges, such as when delivering one to the governor's house, where we see his familiarity with handling a sword and his romantic longing for Elizabeth, feelings his lower class status prevents him from acting on, especially as she faces a possible engagement with a military officer, herself struggling with the rigid expectations of her class and gender, her fashionable corset, which of course functions according to the Hollywood cliche of corsets being worn so tight that they suffocate their subjects, symbolizing this to the point of causing her to faint and fall into the sea, where the Aztec gold she is wearing around her neck, kept out of her own yearning for freedom and adventure, summons the undead pirate crew to retrieve it.
What was that?
It's all very on the nose, but also so engaging, and it gets the point of the characters across about as well as a blockbuster can be expected to within its limited runtime. Jack rescues her from the water, and whilst on the run, crosses paths with Will in a duel that showcases their differing fighting styles. Jack's environmental improvisation that makes me wish Jackie Chan had ever gotten to work with a Hollywood budget and director like this, and Will's straightforward sword skills. This and other early action scenes I actually find more compelling than the climactic fight, at which point there is less character studying to be done and plot revelations to be had, and the fighting persists primarily to extend the spectacle until the story is ready to conclude, rather than actively reshaping the story. That spectacle of course still benefits from the dramatic stakes established by the runtime preceding it, but it isn't quite the same, and I did, by that point, find myself waiting for the next plot beat to happen. And by plot beat, I mean the end of the movie. But that's more of a criticism of typical blockbuster movie structures than a criticism of this movie in particular.
You've assisted in the capture of a dangerous fugitive.
Just doing my civic duty, sir.
Jack is captured, the cursed crew attacks the town and kidnaps Elizabeth, and Will breaks Jack out to help rescue her. Will and Elizabeth can most accurately be considered the protagonists of the trilogy, even with Jack often shifting focus away from them in any kind of scenes they share. They are each more firmly rooted in the historical setting compared to Jack's fantasy pirate, and are reshaped the most over the trilogy's story through their new pirating experiences compared to Jack staying more or less the same, their displacement from their traditional roles compelling them to take on Sparrow-esque characteristics to survive, but never overwriting highlighting how the upbringing they came from informs their decisions. At least not in this first film. It does become less and less relevant in the second and third.
The moonlight shows us what we really are.
She's a modern girl stuck in an 18th century world, so she's great fun to play.
Keira Knightley confidently plays Elizabeth Swan with a mature composure that keeps her stalwart amid the chaos she often finds herself in, which in turn makes her more believable as a romantic interest than if she were just the attractive daughter of a Royal Navy governor. She avoids being a caricature of the period while still helping ground some of the weirder aspects of the world, which she is almost as new to as the audience, only becoming somewhat of what we now colloquially refer to as a girl boss in brief, crowd-pleasing action movie moments, such as
I'm gonna teach you the meaning of pain.
You like pain? Try wearing a corset.
which comes across as the writers wearing their self-consciousness on their sleeves, not wanting to catch flack for a cliché damsel in distress, but still needing that archetype to help ignite their plot into motion, and of course bringing it back around to the symbolism of the cliché suffocating corset from the beginning of the film.
Hello, Poppy.
Parley!
She may begin in a position that resembles a damsel, but not a generic one, largely due to Knightley's performance and the character being slightly infused with these modern sensibilities to poke fun at the trope. From the onset, there is agency and awareness beneath the surface, and as the story progresses, she actively earns her transformation through intelligence and adaptability, such as when she and Jack are marooned, and she tricks him into drunken unconsciousness so she can burn the secret stash of rum, creating a smoke signal for the Navy ships she assumes to be searching for her. The narrative flexibility of characters operating with partial knowledge and exploiting what they think they understand about one another keeps the story from feeling contrived, their actions arriving from personality and circumstance rather than from visible plot manipulation. As with most strong writing, it feels as though the characters' decisions are what drive the narrative in new directions.
My name is Will Turner. My father was Bootstrap Bill Turner. His blood runs in my veins.
Whereas Elizabeth fulfills and gradually subverts that damsel role, Orlando Bloom's Will Turner doesn't stray much from being the film's true straight man protagonist, playing a traditional Hollywood hero for the often humorous chaos of the pirates to contrast. His plain earnestness often singled out as the weakest performance and least interesting character in the cast, though I think criticisms of Orlando Bloom's oversaturation during this start of his career can sometimes be undeservedly harsh. A moment where he attempts to imitate Jack's peculiarity highlights how foreign that kind of flamboyancy seems to Turner or Orlando or both, but it still works as a comedic beat nonetheless.
So that's the reason for all the...
As becomes clear from the moment these two leads take command of Jack's crew, their adventures pull the parts of their characterization that always had pirate potential outside the box of British society until, by the end of the trilogy, they seem no less comfortable and confident taking part in pirate affairs than anyone who started off on that side of society.
Gentlemen! Hoist the colours.
At sea is where they truly come alive and become exciting personalities to watch, and starting off a bit more conventional in Curse of the Black Pearl was necessary to set up that payoff.
You sit down to read a blockbuster action pirate movie script with a certain amount of trepidation because you think, well, it's probably going to be only the romantic version of what that era might have been like. And in some ways it has to be that, because I do want 7-year-olds to be able to come and see it and go, that was cool. And yet at the same time you don't want it to be such a fairy tale that it doesn't kind of mean anything.
The film ultimately reframes pirates as something closer to naval Robin Hoods than to the thieving, pillaging criminals they are historically known as, except without the wealth redistribution that actually makes Robin Hood heroic. Will and Elizabeth aid in this reframing by joining Jack's unlikely misfits, who are far too amusing not to root for, and Jack's loyal first mate and possibly only friend, Joshua Gibbs, was even shown working for the Royal Navy during the prologue, suggesting these seafaring rivals exist on two sides of the same coin. Throughout the franchise, pirates are either shown fighting and stealing from the Navy, or fighting and stealing from each other, and the crews that do closer resemble historical pirates by threatening civilians and regular sailors are the often cursed villains Jack spends his time fighting or running from. So we have separate villainous pirates who make sure the plot happens at all, and then inspirational and aspirational pirates who make the lifestyle look fun and cool.
This is the day that you will always remember as the day that you...
In Curse of the Black Pearl, Barbossa, played by Jeffrey Rush, is the head honcho of that cursed villain crew, with the common opinion on his performance being that he is the only one to match Depp's level, though how iconic the character was able to become was limited by him basically being what the stereotypical pirate of this PG-13 dark fantasy setting would be.
Agreed.
His theatricality and longing give him a vivid, multi-layered personality without undermining his threat. The flamboyant, cartoonish pirateness exaggerating his villainy, but never slipping into parody within this world's context. Obviously, if you were to instead plop him into the middle of Master and Commander, he'd seem a bit silly, as would even the most ordinary of characters here.
I feel nothing. Not the wind on my face, nor the spray of the sea.
What makes Barbossa especially compelling narratively is the clarity with which his motivation shines throughout the film. He isn't chasing treasure for its own sake, at least not anymore. He is chasing the normality of living, which a specific treasure has mechanically stolen from him, and treasure in general has symbolically stolen from him. The pleasure of tasting an apple, his most distinct reoccurring visual motif.
But somehow, from the inside, I was playing the hero, you know, because his dream was that we will lift this curse, I will have a fabulous prize pirate bride, and I will live happily ever after as a very rich rogue. Doesn't work out like that for the villain.
His desire is as human as can be, even if it's coming from an undead, villainous pirate so consumed by greed that he has lost the ability to enjoy anything at all, in contrast to Will and Elizabeth wanting a peaceful life together, or Jack enjoying sailing the seas no matter what, and pursuing immortality only as a means to do that forever. The constraint of existing in family-friendly blockbusters actually works in their favour to prevent them being hateable.
Goodbye! Goodbye.
Whilst a kid watching might be scared of their antagonistic behaviour or the skeletal appearances they take on under cinematic moonlight, as an adult you can only buy into the stakes so much, and you might just find yourself clapping along to the pantomime unseriousness of the whole thing from the moment Jack Sparrow makes his entrance. At times, actually quite often, the film undercuts its own stakes with humour, particularly during climactic moments, but that combination is part of the appeal of this kind of swashbuckling adventure, and the tonal lightness rarely collapses the sense of threat that is always, if through nothing else, sustained by the tropical gothic visuals.
And action!
If you look at kind of cinema history, Hollywood used to make these movies a lot, and then they just got too expensive.
On first impression, it might seem like an unlikely leap for Verbinski, a director who started his feature film career with Mouse Hunt, to helm something as ambitious as Pirates of the Caribbean, but anyone who also grew up with Mouse Hunt can see the connection. As is often expressed, it's hard to believe a live-action blockbuster with this much personality to have come out of Disney. We may shudder at the thought of what their modern self, or insert any other risk-averse studio, would do with this kind of concept and budget, but undoubtedly we already have plenty of examples to groan at the memory of. What makes Curse of the Black Pearl different, and to a lesser extent its two Verbinski-directed follow-ups, is that it doesn't feel manufactured by committee, like a lot of these franchises turn into if they didn't already start out like that. In that sense, it reminds me of some of its what now feels equally unlikely contemporary blockbusters. Alfonso Cuarón directing Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, or Sam Raimi directing the early Spider-Man films, at an ideal transition period in the industry, where CGI had advanced enough to be convincing, but not started to be used as a cheap and lazy alternative to practical effects, stunts and set pieces. Nothing here looks like it was filmed on a soundstage, and the weathered griminess of every character and their costumes don't look like they just stepped out of a 3D printer. That the film was based on a theme park ride may have been its greatest strength after all, giving the studio the brand recognition they want to feel confident funding a large-scale production, but having no dense pre-existing narrative canon for the filmmakers to abide by.
This is either madness or brilliance. It's remarkable how often those two traits coincide.
Ambitious and memorable and accessible on a mainstream level, Curse of the Black Pearl works wonderfully as a standalone swashbuckling adventure, and though Dead Man's Chest begins introducing the bloated mythology and crowd-pleasing callbacks that would gradually turn the franchise into a shell of its former self, this trilogy holds together well enough to be a shining symbol of what modern blockbusters could have been and still have the opportunity to turn into.
Get in there and go like this.
That's pretty good.